and welcome to True Crime and Makeup Monday. As always, this is Monday, and we are here to do True Crime and Makeup Monday. I just said that. Anyway, as always, trigger warning, the usual stuff, death, terrorism, murder, graphic crime scenes, guns, all that stuff that needs a trigger warning. Also, please bear with me today because I am still sick. And I am sounding a little funny. This is gonna bug me. This is really gonna bug me. Okay, whatever. Just dealing with it. On November 5th, 2009, a mass shooting took place at Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, near Killeen, Texas. And that might be Killian. I don't know. To me, it looks like Killeen, but it's probably not what it is. Nadal Hassan, a U.S. Army major and psychiatrist, fatally shot 13 people and injured more than 30 others. It was the deadliest mass shooting on American military base and the deadliest terrorist attack of the United States since the September 11th attacks, until it was surpassed by the Orlando nightclub shooting in 2016. Because that's goals right there, Hassan was shot and as a result paralyzed from the waist down. Don't feel too bad for him. I mean, he could have been so much worse. He should have been, if you know what I mean. But he wasn't. He had to stand trial, which he totally deserved to. He was arraigned by a military court on July 20th, 2011, and was charged with 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted murder under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. His court-martial began on August 7th, 2013. And due to the nature of the charges, more than one premeditated or first-degree murder case in a single crime, Hassan faced either the death penalty or life in prison without parole upon conviction. Yay. No. Much better. Okay, sorry about that. Hassan was found guilty on 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted murder. 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder on August 23rd, 2013, and was sentenced to death on August 28th, 2013. Days after the shooting, reports in the media revealed that a joint terrorism task force had been aware of a series of emails between Hassan and the Yemen-based IMM Anwar al-Awlaki, who had been monitored by the NSA as a security threat, and that Hassan's colleagues had been aware of his increasing Islamic radicalization for years. The failures to prevent the shooting led the Defense Department and the FBI to commission investigations and Congress to hold hearings. The U.S. government declined requests from survivors and family members of the slain to categorize the Fort Hood shooting as an act of terrorism or motivated by militant Islamic religious convictions. In November 2011, a group of survivors and family members filed a lawsuit against the government for negligence in preventing the attack and to force the government to classify the shooting as terrorism. The Pentagon argued that charging Hassan with terrorism was not possible within the military justice system, and that such action could harm the military prosecutor's ability to sustain a guilty verdict against Hassan. According to pre-trial testimony, Hassan entered the Guns Galore store in Killeen on July 31st, 2009, and purchased the FN-57 semi-automatic pistol that he would use in the attack at Fort Hood. According to Army Specialist William Gilbert, a regular customer at the store, Hassan entered the store and asked for the most technologically advanced weapon on the market and the one with the highest standard magazine capacity. Hassan was allegedly asked how he intended to use the weapon, but simply repeated that he wanted the most advanced handgun with the largest magazine capacity. The three people with Hassan, Gilbert, the store manager, and an employee, all recommended the FN-57 pistol. As Gilbert owned one of the pistols, he spent an hour describing its operation to Hassan. Hassan left the store, saying he needed to research the weapon. He returned to purchase the gun the next day and visited the store once a week to buy extra magazines, along with over 3,000 rounds of SS-192 and SS-197SR ammunition total. In the weeks prior to the attack, Hassan visited an outdoor shooting range in Florence, where he allegedly became adept at hitting silhouette targets at distances of up to 100 yards. At approximately 1:34 p.m. local time, November 5th, 2009, Hassan entered the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, where personnel receive routine medical treatment immediately prior to and on return from deployment. He was preparing to deploy to Afghanistan with his unit and had been to the center several times before. He was armed with the FN-57 pistol, which he had fitted with two laser laser sights, one red and one green, a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver. Was later found on Hassan's person, but he did not use it to shoot any of the victims. After entering the building, Hassan went to the first desk to the right of the north doors and asked to see Major Parrish. Major Parrish worked in the building and had been assisting Hassan in his deployment preparations. The worker went down the hall to get Parrish. According to eyewitnesses, Hassan then went around behind the desk and bowed his head for several seconds before he suddenly stood up, shouted, "Allahu Akbar," and opened fire. Witnesses said Hassan initially sprayed bullets at soldiers in a fan-like motion before taking aim at individual soldiers. Eyewitness Sergeant Michael Davis said the rate of fire was pretty much constant shooting. When I initially heard it, it sounded like an M16. Army Reserve Captain John Gaffney tried to stop Hassan by charging him, but was mortally wounded before reaching him. Civilian physician assistant Michael Cahill also tried to charge Hassan with a chair, but was shot and killed. Army Reserve Specialist Logan Burnett tried to stop Hassan by throwing a folding table at him, but he was shot in the left hip, fell down, and crawled to a nearby cubicle. According to testimony from witnesses, Hassan passed up several opportunities to shoot civilians and instead targeted soldiers in uniform, who, in accordance with military policy, were not carrying personal firearms. At one point, Hassan reportedly approached a group of 5 civilians hiding under a desk. He looked at them, swept the dots of the pistol's laser sight over one of the men's faces, and turned away without firing. While this was going on, an army specialist broke a window in the back of the building where Major Parrish worked. 2 soldiers in Parrish exited the building through the broken window on the east side of the building and escaped to the parking lot, though one soldier severely cut his hand on broken glass. All of this happened as Hassan was still roaming the building and shooting. Base civilian police sergeant. So from what I understand, yes, she was a civilian, but she was like base police, so like she was, I'm not really sure how that works, but she was kind of both, I guess, who had rushed to the scene in her patrol car, encountered Hassan in the area outside the Soldier Readiness Processing Center. Hassan fired at Munley, who exchanged shots with him using her 9mm pistol. Where did I put that? Hold on. Sorry, guys. I put a brush somewhere and I can't find it. Uh, I don't know what I did with it. That's not a good thing because I need that brush. Sorry. Okay. Hassan fired at Munley, who exchanged shots with him using um, her 9mm M9 pistol. Munley's hand was hit by a shrapnel. Um, when one of Hassan's bullets struck a nearby rain gutter. Okay, sorry, struck a nearby rain gutter, and then two bullets struck Munley. The first bullet hit her thigh, and the second hit her knee. And as she began to fall from the first bullet, the second bullet struck her femur, shattering it and knocking her to the ground. Hassan walked up to Munley and kicked her pistol out of reach, but he did not further shoot her. So yeah. As the shooting continued outside, nurses and medics entered the building. An unidentified soldier secured the south double doors with his ACU belt, and rushed to help the wounded. I'm slow today. And rushed to help the wounded. According to the responding nurses, there was so much blood covering the floor inside the building that they were unable to maintain balance and difficulty reaching the wounded to help them. In the area outside the building, Hassan continued to shoot at fleeing soldiers. Herman Toro, director of the Soldier Readiness Processing Site, arrived at this time. Hassan had gone around the building and was out of sight but still shooting. Toro and another site worker rushed to assist Lieutenant Colonel Juanita Warman, who was down on the ground north of the medical building. They both took her by the arms and tried to carry her to safety when Hassan returned and aimed his red laser across Toro's chest, but did not fire. Toro took cover behind an electrical box and saw civilian police sergeant Mark Todd arrive and shout commands at Hassan to surrender. Todd said then he turned and fired a couple of rounds at me. I didn't hear him say a word. He just turned and fired. Like, this dude was intense. Okay, this is like... The two exchanged shots and fired, Hassan emptying his pistol in the process. He stopped, turned, and reached into his pocket for a new magazine before being felled by 5 shots from Todd. Todd then ran over to Hassan, kicked the pistol out of his hand, and put handcuffs on him as he fell unconscious. Which I'm not even, like, sorry for you, dude. Like, you are a horrible person. LTC Tom Eberhardt, which I believe is like, I actually don't know what that is. Deputy Director of Human Resources Fort Hood arrived and entered the medical building to help. He had to step over bodies to enter the building's north entrance. He assisted another soldier in performing CPR on one of the wounded soldiers at the building's waiting area. Folding chairs were scattered all around. He noticed a soldier outside the south doors of the building and went to help, removing the belt from the door. The downed soldier was Staff Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford, a medical assistant from the building. He had 2 wounds in the abdomen and a wound to the scalp. He was unconscious, and LTC Eberhardt went back into the building to retrieve a folding table. Other soldiers assisted in getting Sergeant Lunsford onto the table and around the building to the triage area. An investigator later testified that 146 spent shell casings were recovered inside the building. Another 68 casings were collected outside for a total of 240 for a total of 214 rounds fired by the attacker and responding police officers. A medic who treated Hassan said his pockets were full of pistol magazines. When the shooting ended, he was still carrying 177 rounds of unfired ammunition in his pockets, contained in both 20 and 30 round magazines. The incident, which lasted about 10 minutes, resulted in 13 killed, 2 soldiers and 1 civilian. 11 died at the scene, and 2 died later in a hospital, and 30 people were wounded. Initially, officials thought three soldiers were involved in the shooting. 2 other soldiers were detained but subsequently released, meaning that there was no sufficient evidence to say that they definitely were working with this guy. And I think he later confirmed too that he was working entirely on his own. He didn't have anybody working with him, if that makes sense. The incident, which lasted about 10 minutes. Sorry, read that already. The Fort Hood website posted a notice indicating that the shooting was not a drill. Immediately after the shooting, the base and surrounding areas were locked down by military police and U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command until around 7 p.m. local time. In addition, Texas Rangers, Texas DPS troopers, deputies from the Bell County Sheriff's Office, and FBI agents from Austin and Waco were dispatched to the base. Yeah, because it's military. Now it's big deal because it's military. U.S. President Barack Obama was briefed on the incident and later made a statement about the shooting. On November 5th, 2010, 1 year later, 52 individuals received awards for their actions in the shooting. The Soldier's Medal was awarded posthumously to Captain John Gaffney, who died trying to charge the shooter. 50 other medals were presented to other responders, including 7 officers who were awarded the Soldier's Medal. The Secretary of the Army Award for Valor was awarded to police officers Kimberly Munley and Mark Todd for the roles they played in stopping the shooter. On May 23rd, 2011, the Army Award for Valor was posthumously awarded to the civilian physician assistant Michael Cahill, who died trying to charge the shooter with his chair. Which, he deserved it. Everybody who got an award in this situation deserved it. That is for sure. Hold on, my vision got blurry. Such a pain with this ear thing. On May 23rd, nope. In May 2012, Senator Joe Lieberman and Representative Peter T. King proposed legislation that would make the victims of the shooting eligible for the Purple Heart in the 113th Congress. Representative John Carter introduced legislation to change the shooting designation from workplace violence to combat-related, which would make the victims of the shooting eligible to receive full benefits and the Purple Heart. In July 2014, a memorial for those killed during the attack began to be built in Killeen, whatever it's called. The dedication ceremony for the memorial was held in March 2016. On February 6, 2015, the U.S. Department of Defense issued a press release in which the Secretary of the Army, John McHugh, announced that he was approving the awarding of the Purple Heart and its civilian counterpart, the Secretary of Defense Medal for the Defense of Freedom, to victims of the shooting. This is a result of Congress expanding the eligibility requirement under a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2015. On April 10th, 2015, nearly 50 awards were handed out to dozens of survivors. Couldn't think of anybody who deserved it more. In October 2018, the program on extremism at George Washington University published a case study about the radicalization of Nidal Hasan. The report is based on previously unpublished as well as new sources, including primary source documents, discussions with those close to Hasan, and interviews with Hasan himself. The paper concludes that his faith was fundamental to the development of his worldview and his pathway towards radicalization, and that his radicalization followed a linear pathway. "13 people, 12 soldiers, and 1 civilian were killed in the attack. Over 30 people were wounded, some from gunshots, others from falls or other injuries incurred during the incident. And many suffer psychological trauma or shock. The Army, press, and investigative bodies have reported several numbers for the total number of injured without indicating what sorts of injuries they were counting nor how. 29, 30, 31, 32, 38, and 42. Hasan, the gunman, was taken to Scott and White Memorial Hospital, a trauma center in Temple, Texas, where he was held under heavy guard. Hasan was hit by at least 4 shots as a result of bullet wounds to his spine. He is now paraplegic. He was later held at the Bell County Jail in Belton, Texas. 10 of the injured were also treated at Scott and White. 7 wounded victims were taken to Metroplex Adventist Hospital in Khalil. 8 others received hospital treatment for shock. On November 20th, 2009, it was announced that 8 of the wounded service members would deploy overseas. The fatalities. So, the 13 people killed were civilian physician assistant Michael Grant Cahill, 62, of Spokane, Washington. Major Liberardo Eduardo Caravio, 52, of Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua. Staff Sergeant Justin Michael DeCrow, 32, of Plymouth, Indiana. Captain John Paul Gaffney, 56, of Serra Mesa, California. Specialist Frederick Green, 29, of Mountain City, Tennessee. 22-year-old Specialist Jason Dean Hunt of Norman, Oklahoma. Staff Sergeant Amy C. Kruger, 29, of Kiel, Wisconsin. Private First Class Aaron Thomas Nemelka, 19, West Jordan, Utah. Captain Russell Gilbert Seeger, 51, of Racine, Wisconsin. Private First Class Francesca Velez, 21, of Chicago, Illinois. Lieutenant Colonel Juanita Lee Warman, 55, of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Private First Class Komsi Zhuang, 23, from St. Paul, Minnesota. He'd immigrated from Thailand. The following people wounded but survived were Specialist James Armstrong, Sergeant Patrick Blue III, Kiara Bono Torkelson, Specialist Logan M. Burnett, Specialist Alan Carroll, Captain Dorothy Karskadon, Staff Sergeant Joy Clerk, Specialist Matthew D. Cook, Staff Sergeant Chad Davis. Did I say Staff Sergeant Joseph. Staff Sergeant Chad Davis. Can't speak English, sorry. Private Mike Engel, Private Joseph T. Foster, Private Amber Gadlin, known at this time as Amber Behar, Sergeant Nathan Hewitt, Sergeant Alvin Howard, Private Najee M. Hull, Staff Sergeant Eric Williams Jackson, Private Justin T. Johnson, Staff Sergeant Alonzo M. Lunsford Jr., Staff Sergeant Sean N. Manning, Staff Sergeant Paul Martin, Second Lieutenant Brandy Mason, Specialist Grant Moxon, Civilian Police Sergeant Kimberly Munley, Specialist Dana Ferguson Roscoe, Chief Warrant Christopher H. Royal, Major Randy Royer, Specialist Jonathan Sims, Specialist George O. Stratton III, Staff Sergeant Patrick Ziegler, Staff Sergeant Miguel A. Valdeva, and Staff Sergeant Thomas Nguyen. During his court-martial on August 6, 2013, before a panel of 13 officers, Major Nadal Malik Hassan declared that he was the shooter. Hassan is unmarried and was described as socially isolated. Born in the United States, Hassan is a practicing Muslim who, according to one of his cousins, became more doubt after the deaths of his parents in 1998 and 2001. His cousin did not recall him ever expressing radical or anti-American views. Another cousin, Nadar Hassan, a lawyer in Virginia, said that Nadal Hassan's opinion turned against the United States after he heard stories from his patients who had returned from fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. Because of what Hassan said was discrimination of his deepening anguish about serving in a military that fought against Muslims, he told some members of his family that he wanted to leave the military. From 2003 to 2009, sorry about that. From 2003 to 2009, Hassan was stationed at Walter Reed Medical Center for his internship and residency. He also had a 2-year fellowship at USUHS, completed in 2009. According to National Public Radio, NPR, officials at Walter Reed Medical Center repeatedly expressed concern about Hassan's behavior during this time. During the entire 6 years he was there, Hassan's supervisors gave him poor evaluations and warned him that he was doing substandard work. In early 2008, and on later occasions, several key officials met to discuss what to do about Hassan. Attendees of these meetings reportedly included the Walter Reed Chief of Psychiatry, the chairman of the USUHS Psychiatry Department, 2 assistant chairs of the USUHS Psychiatry Department, one of whom was the director of Hassan's Psychiatry Fellowship, and another psychiatrist, and the director of the Walter Reed Psychiatric Residency Program. According to NPR, fellow students and faculty were deeply troubled by Hassan's behavior, which they described as disconnected, aloof, paranoid, belligerent, and schizoid. Just the kind of guy you want in the military, right? Once while presenting what was supposed to be a medical lecture to other psychiatrists, Hassan talked about Islam and said that according to the Quran, non-believers would be sent to hell, decapitated, set on fire, and have burning oil poured down their throats. A Muslim psychiatrist in the audience raised his hand and challenged Hassan's claims. According to the Associated Press, Hassan's lecture also justified suicide bombings. In the summer of 2009, after completion of his programs, he was transferred to Fort Hood. At Fort Hood, Hassan rented an apartment away from other officers in a somewhat rundown area. 2 days before the shooting, Hassan gave away furniture from his home, saying he was going to be deployed. He also handed out copies of the Quran along with his business cards, which gave a Maryland phone number and read behavioral health, mental health, life skills, Nadal Hassan, MD, MPH, SOA, psychiatrist. The cards did not reflect his military rank. And apparently that's like a big red flag, because you should be proud of your military rank, and you should be. So that was like a red flag, but apparently not enough of a red flag for anybody to be like, hey, something's wrong with this guy. I feel like he was overlooked a lot. Like a lot of the things that like he did that should have been red flags were just severely overlooked. In May 2001, Hassan attended the funeral of his mother, held at the Dar al-Haraja Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, which has 3,000 members. He may have also occasionally prayed there, but for a period of 10 years, he prayed several times a week at the Muslim Community Center in Silver Spring, Maryland, closer to where he lived and worked. He was regularly seen at the Muslim Community Center by the imam and other members. His attendance His attendance at the Falls Church mosque was in the same period of Nawaf al-Hazimi and Hani Hanjour, two of the hijackers in the September 11th attacks, who went there from April 2001 to later in the summer. Law enforcement officials said that the FBI will probably look into whether Hassan associated with the hijackers. A review of Hassan's computer and his email accounts revealed that he visited radical Islamist websites. A senior law enforcement official said. Did I put that in here already? That's bad, guys. That's bad. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Hassan expressed admiration for the teachings of Anwar al-Awlaki, the Imam of the Dar el-Hijra Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, between 2000 and 2002. This is why you shouldn't work when you're sick, because you can't read and you can't keep up. Al-Awlaki had been the subject of several FBI investigations and had helped hijackers. That did not come out the way I wanted it to. And had helped hijackers al-Hazimi and Hanjour settle and provided spiritual guidance to them when they met him at the San Diego Mosque after they drove to the East Coast. That's a little better. Considered moderate then, Al-Awlaki appeared to have become radicalized after 2006 and was under surveillance. After Hassan wrote nearly 20 emails to him between December 2008 and June 2009, Hassan was investigated by the FBI. The fact that Asari had certain communications with the subject of a joint terrorism task force investigation was revealed in an FBI press release made on November 9th, 2009. And reporting by the media immediately revealed that the subject was Al-Awlaki and the communications were emails. In one, Hassan wrote, "I can't wait to join you in the afterlife." Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, a military analyst at the Center for Advanced Defense Studies, suggests that Hassan was either offering himself up or had already crossed that line in his own mind. Army employees were informed of the contacts at the time, but they believed that the emails were consistent with Hassan's professional mental health research about Muslims in the armed forces as part of his master's work in disaster and preventative psychiatry. A DC-based joint terrorism task force operating under the FBI was notified, and the information reviewed by one of its Defense Criminal Investigative Service employees, who concluded that there was not sufficient information for a larger investigation. Senior officers at the Department of Defense stated that they were not notified of such investigations before the shootings. I'm going to change it. I'll be right back. Army employees were informed of the contacts at the time, but they believed that the emails were consistent with Hassan's professional mental health research about Muslims in the armed forces as part of his master's work in disaster preventative psychiatry. A DC based joint terrorism task force operating under the FBI was notified, and the information reviewed by one of its Defense Criminal Investigation Service employees, who concluded that there was not sufficient information for a larger investigation. Probably should have done it anyway. Immediately after the shootings, analysts and public officials openly debated Hassan's motive and preceding psychological state. A military activist, Selena Coppa, remarks that Hassan's psychiatrist colleagues failed to notice how deeply disturbed someone right in their midst was. A spokesperson for U.S. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, one of the first officials to comment on Hassan's background, told reporters that Hassan was upset about his pending deployment to Afghanistan on November 28th. Noel Hamad, Hassan's aunt, said that the family was not aware he was being sent to Afghanistan. The Dallas Morning News reported on November 17th that ABC News, citing anonymous sources, reported that investigators suspect that the shootings were triggered by Superior's refusal to process Hassan's requests that some of his patients be prosecuted for war crimes based on the statements they made during psychiatric sessions with him. Dallas attorney Patrick McLean, a former Marine, said that Hassan may have been legally justified in his request, but he could not comment without knowing what soldiers had said. Fellow psychiatrists complained to superiors that Hassan's actions violated doctor-patient confidentiality, which, if they had done something to harm another person or to harm themselves without it being within the guidelines of military service, they're legally required to report it. It's just the way it is. It's a fine line between mandatory reporting and confidentiality. And if in this case he truly believed these people were acting not of military standards, then he by law was required to report any crime that was committed. So I'm not really sure. I don't know that, like, I couldn't find anything about like what he said or what was said to him that made him want to do this. I just want to point out that it is a very fine line between mandatory reporting and doctor-patient confidentiality. So he may have been well within his legal rights to do what he did. May have been a requirement for him to do what he did. I can't find anything to say that he for sure was in the right or he for sure was in the wrong. So, Duane Reasoner, a convert to Islam whom Hassan was mentoring in the religion, said the psychiatrist did not want to be deployed. He said Muslims shouldn't be in the U.S. military because obviously Muslims shouldn't kill Muslims. He told me not to join the army. Senator Joe Lieberman called for a probe by the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, which he chairs. Lieberman said it's premature to reach conclusions about what motivated Hassan. I think it's very important to let the Army and the FBI go forward with this investigation before we reach any conclusions. 2 weeks later, when opening his committee's hearings, Lieberman labeled the shooting the most destructive terrorist attack on America since September 11, 2001. Michael Wellner, MD, a leading forensic psychiatrist with experience examining mass shooters, said that the shooting had elements common to both ideological and workplace mass shootings. Walt Wellner, who believed Hassan wanted to create a spectacle, said that a trauma care worker, even under mental distress, would not normally be expected to be homicidal towards his patients unless his ideology trumped his Hippocratic oath. Wellner thought Hassan expressed this in shouting Allah Akbar as he shot unarmed men. An analyst of terror investigations, Carl Tobias, opined that the attack did not fit the profile of terrorism and was more similar to the Virginia Tech massacre committed by a student believed to be severely mentally ill. Michael Schur, the retired former head of the Bin Laden Issue Station, and former U.S. Attorney General Michael McCasey had called the event a terrorist attack, which, I mean, that's essentially what it was. He was killing in the name of Muslims. So that's essentially, yes, it was a terrorist attack. Um, as has the terrorism expert Wayland Shares. Retired General Barry McCaffrey said on Anderson Cooper 360 that it's starting to appear as if this was a domestic terrorist attack on fellow soldiers by a major in the army who was educated for 6 years while he was giving off these vibes of disloyalty to his own force. Some of Hassan's former colleagues have said he performed substandard work and occasionally unnerved them by expressing fervent Islamic views and deep contrition or deep opposition to the US led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Others were more concerned about his apparent mental instability and paranoid behaviors. Throughout his years at Walter Reed, heads of departments had regularly discussed his mental state as they were deeply concerned about his behavior. Brian Levin of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism wrote that the case sits at the crossroads of crime, terrorism, and mental distress. He compared the possible role of religion to the beliefs of Scott Roeder, a Christian who murdered Dr. George Tiller, who practiced abortion. Such offenders often self radicalize from a volatile mix of personal distress, psychological issues, and an ideology that can be sculpted to justify and explain their antisocial learnings. At this trial in June 2013, Hassan declared his motive as wanting to defend the lives of the Taliban leadership in Afghanistan. Army prosecutors said that he sought to align himself with Islamic extremists. On August 2013, Fox News released documents from Hassan in which he explained his motives. Most of the documents included the acronym SOA, which is considered shorthand for Soldier of Allah. In one document, Hassan wrote that he was required to renounce any oaths that required him to defend any man made constitution over the commandments mandated in Islam. In another document, he wrote, I invite the world to read the book of Almighty Allah and decide for themselves. It is the truth from their Lord. My desire is to help people attain heaven by the mercy of their Lord. In another document, Hassan wrote that there is a fundamental and irreconcilable conflict between American democracy and Islamic governance. Specifically, in an American democracy, we the people govern according to what we the people think is right or wrong, even if it specifically goes against what Almighty God commands. Has further explained that separation of church and state is an unacceptable attempt to get along with the unbelievers because Islam was brought to prevail over other religions and not to be equal with or subservient to them. It's how they feel. I mean, he's not in the wrong because that is how they feel about it, but what he did obviously was wrong. No question about that. Many have characterized the attack as terrorism. 2 weeks after recommending no conclusions be drawn until after the investigation was completed, Senator Joe Lieberman called the shooting the most destructive terrorist attack on America since September 11th, 2001. Michael Schur, the retired former head of the Bin Laden issue station, and former U.S. Attorney Michael Mikulski had I feel like I just read this. Maybe I did. I don't know. Also described it as a terrorist attack. A group of soldiers and families have sought to have the defense secretary designate the shooting a terrorist attack. This would provide them with benefits equal to injuries in combat. The FBI found no evidence to indicate Hassan had any co-conspirators or was part of a broader terrorist plot, classifying him as a homegrown violent extremist. Conversely, the Defense Department currently classifies Hassan's attack as an act of workplace violence and would not make further statements until the court-martial. The U.S. President's initial response to the attack came during a scheduled speech, the Tribal Nations Conference for America's 564 federally recognized Native American tribes. Obama was criticized by the media for being insensitive as he addressed the shooting only 3 minutes into his prepared speech, and then for not according it's sufficient gravitas. Later, the president delivered the memorial eulogy for the victims. Reaction to his memorial speech was largely positive, with some deeming it one of the best. The speech was criticized by a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who found the speech largely absent of emotion, while a National Review columnist criticized Obama for refusing to acknowledge Islamic terrorism as having a role in the shooting. On December 6, 2015, in his speech addressing terrorism, Obama concluded the Fort Hood shooting among Islamic-inspired terrorist incidents. Retired Army Colonel Terry Lee, who had worked with Hassan, said the psychiatrist expressed the hope that Obama would withdraw U.S. troops from Iraq and Afghanistan and argued with military colleagues who supported the wars. A spokesman for the Defense Department called the shooting an isolated and tragic case, and Defense Secretary Robert Gates pledged that his department would do everything in its power to help the Fort Hood community get through these difficult times. The chair of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, Carl Levin, and numerous politicians expressed condolences to the victims and their families. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano stated, "We object to and do not believe that anti-Muslim sentiment should emanate from this. This was an individual who does not obviously represent the Muslim faith." Chief of Staff Chief of Staff General George W. Casey Jr. said, "I'm concerned for the increased speculation could cause a backlash against some of our Muslim soldiers. Our diversity, not only in our army, but in our country, is a strength. And as horrific as this tragedy was, if our diversity becomes a casualty, I think that's worse." I would have to agree. In January 2010, a senior Obama administration official who declined to be named referred to the shooting as an act of terrorism, although other administration officials have not referred to the shootings as a terrorist event. Several people, including Senator Joe Lieberman and General Barry McCaffrey, have called the event a terrorist attack. The United States Department of Defense and federal law enforcement agencies have classified the shootings as an act of workplace violence. This was changed by the fiscal year 2015's National Defense Authorization Act, which broadened the criteria for awarding the Purple Heart to include an attack by a foreign terrorist organization if the attack was inspired or motivated by the foreign terrorist organization. This allowed the Army to award the Purple Heart and its civilian equivalent, the Defense of Freedom Medal, to victims of the attack. The U.S. government declined requests from survivors and family members of the slain to categorize the Fort Hood shooting as an act of terrorism or motivated by militant Islamic religious convictions. In November 2011, In November 2011, a group of survivors and family members filed a lawsuit against the government for negligence in preventing the attack and to force the government to classify the shooting as terrorism. Give me just a second. Sorry, I'm trying to clean up this lip. Okay. Victims of the shooting were denied Purple Hearts as well as associated benefits. In 2013, during the 113th United States Congress, Representative Carter submitted the Honoring the Fort Hood Heroes Act for consideration. The bill was referred to committee in 2015. A similar bill was introduced to the legislature of Texas to award the Texas Purple Heart Medal to the shooting victims. The National Defense Authorization Act 2015 authorizes the Department of Defense to award Purple Heart medals to those wounded during the attack. The award was previously denied due to the categorization of the event as workplace violence. The law requires the Department of Defense to define the event as an international terrorist attack. In February 2015, the Department of the Army approved awarding of the Purple Heart to those injured by Hassan during the shooting, providing those injured with a higher degree of services from the Veterans Affairs. The Army planned to present Purple Hearts in April of 2015, which was carried out on April 10th, 2015, following the awarding benefits. Following the awarding benefits for those wounded in hostile fire were extended to the Purple Heart recipients, and it was announced that those killed and injured during the 2009 Little Rock recruiting office shooting would also receive the Purple Heart. Veterans groups across the United States expressed condolences for victims of the attack. American Legion National Commander Clarence E. Hill stated the American Legion extends condolences to the victims and the families of those affected by the shootings of Fort Hood. Veterans of Foreign Wars National Commander Thomas J. Tradewell Sr. states, the entire military family is grieving right now. I just want them to know they do not grieve alone. Our hearts and prayers are with them. The Army places strict restrictions on personal firearms carried onto Fort Hood and other bases. Military weapons are used only for training or by base security. Personal weapons brought on base are required to be secured at all times and must be registered with the Provost Marshal. Specialist Jerry Richard, a soldier working at the Readiness Center, said he felt this policy left the soldiers vulnerable to violent assaults. Overseas, you are ready for it, but here you can't even defend yourself. Jacob Sullum, an opponent of gun control, described the base as a gun-free zone. A spokeswoman for the Hassan family said that the actions of their cousin were despicable and deplorable and did not reflect how they were raised. Soon after the attack, Anwar al-Awlaki posted praise for Hassan for the shooting on his website. He wrote, Nidal Hassan is a hero. The fact that fighting against the U.S. Army is an Islamic duty today cannot be disputed. Nidal has killed soldiers who are about to be deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan in order to kill Muslims. In March 2010, al-Awlaki alleged that the Obama administration tried to portray Hassan's action as an individual act of violence from an estranged individual, and that it was trying to suppress information for the American public. He said, quote, until this moment, the administration is refusing to release the emails exchanged between myself and Nidal. And after the operation of our brother Umar Farouk, the initial comments coming from the administration were looking the same, another attempt at covering up the truth. But al-Qaeda cut off Obama from deceiving the world again by issuing their statement claiming responsibility for the operation. End quote. The U.S. investigation found no evidence that ties Hassan to al-Qaeda. On April 6, 2010, the New York Times reported that President Obama had authorized the targeted killing of al-Awlaki, who had been hunted by the Yemen government since going into hiding. On September 30th, 2011, 2 Predator drones fired missiles at a vehicle with al-Awlaki aboard, killing him and Samir Khan. The criminal investigation was conducted jointly by the FBI, the U.S. Army, and the Texas Rangers Division. As a member of the military, Hassan is subject to the jurisdiction of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, military law. He was initially represented by Belton, Texas-based John P. Galligan, a criminal defense attorney and retired U.S. Army Colonel. I cannot speak today. Hassan regained consciousness on November 9th, but refused to talk to investigators. On November 9th, the FBI said that the investigators believed Hassan had acted alone. They disclosed that they had reviewed evidence, which included 2008 conversations with an individual that an official identified as Anwar al-Awlaki, but said they did not find any evidence that Hassan had received orders or help from anyone. Army officials said, right now we're operating on the belief that he acted alone and He acted alone and had no help. No motive for the shootings was offered, but they believed Hassan had written an internet posting that appeared to support suicide bombings. Senator Lieberman opined that Hassan was under personal stress and may have turned to Islamic extremism. In late January 2011, Hassan was judged sane for trial by an Army Sanity Board, normally composed of doctors and psychologists. This allowed a capital trial and more information about his mental state at the time of the shootings was able to be introduced by the defense during the trial. He was formally arraigned on July 20th. Um, he was formally arraigned on July 20th, 2011. They found him in contempt in July 2012 and fined him for not shaving, for not following Army regulations and shaving his beard. Um, he was fined again for retaining his. He was. Bleh. His court martial was begun to on set to begin on August 20th, 2012. He was fined again for retaining his beard and warned that he could be forcibly shaved prior to his court martial. On August 15th, he was scheduled to enter pleas. He would not be allowed to plead guilty to the premeditated charges as the prosecution is pursuing the death penalty in his case. I mean, like, I guess you can't plead guilty because they're seeking the death penalty. So, like, I mean, you could still seek the death penalty if they pled guilty, though. So I'm not really sure why that's a thing, like, why that wasn't allowed. Because, I mean, unless there's, like, some sort of, like, agreement within, like, the Army that if you plead guilty, you can't be put to death. And I don't know. I don't know. I should have looked that up before I started this, but I didn't. I forgot about it. It's fine. On June 3rd, 2013, a military judge gave approval for Hassan to represent himself at his upcoming murder trial. He justified his actions during the Fort Hood shooting by claiming that the U.S. military was at war with Islam. Overall, the trial cost almost $5 million, with the largest expense being transportation, followed by expert witness fees. Yeah, and just so you know, yes, there is. They charge a fee to come and testify, which I didn't even know you were allowed to do, because I just assumed that if you were, like, summoned as a witness, you didn't have a choice. But apparently, if you're, like, an expert witness, you get a, like, retention fee. On August 23rd, 2013, Hassan was convicted on all charges after the jury deliberated for 7 hours. 5 days later, a U.S. military court sentenced him to death for the shootings. At the time of his sentencing, he became the 6th person on military death row. The FBI noted that Hassan had first been brought to their attention in December 2008. Wait, I messed up something here. Hold on. No, that's right. A lawsuit filed in November 2011 by victims and their family members alleges that the government's failure to take action against Hassan before the attack was willful negligence prompted by political correctness. The 83 claimant seeks $750 million in compensation from the Army. I don't think the Army has $750 million, but if they do, they don't now. As of 2012, the Department of Defense classifies the case as one of workplace violence. A spokesman for the department stated, the Department of Defense is committed to the integrity of the ongoing court-martial proceedings of Major Nidal Hassan, and for that reason will not further characterize at this time the incident that occurred at Fort Hood on November 5th, 2009. On November 5th, 2012, 148 plaintiffs, including victims and families of victims, filed a wrongful death claim against the United States government, Hassan, and the estate of Anwar Allah Awalki. Their lawsuit alleges there were due process violations, internal misrepresentation, assault and battery, gross negligence, and civil conspiracy. The lawsuit was featured on ABC News on February 12, 2013, but was placed on hold pending the conclusion of Hassan's court martial. As of June 2016, the stay on the civil suit remains in place. That is the story of the 2009 Fort Hood shooting. And I mean, you can tell, like, just from the beginning with this one, that things were not handled the way they should have been. They had evidence that this guy was cuckoo bananas and they did nothing about it. So, yeah, this one I could blame on the U.S. government because they just did not do what they should have done. Thank you for bearing with me and my inability to read or speak today, and also me being sick on top of everything else. Be here next week. We will be going over Mark Goudot, who is an American serial killer, kidnapper, thief, and rapist. So that'll be a really good story. As always, please don't do anything I wouldn't do. Be cautiously kind to others and make good choices. Have a good day, guys. Bye.